there's a lot of people out there that really struggle with the question with, how do I forgive myself? How do I forgive myself for something I've done? Whether it's, broken trust with someone, or not followed through on goals and dreams, or not being consistent in your life, or maybe messing up a marriage or a relationship on, some form or another. And so often it becomes this deep-rooted shame and guilt, right? This fear and worry of, how can I live life at peace again when I've done some things I shouldn't have done, right? The question is, how ultimately do I forgive myself for these things? And I get it. Ultimately, sometimes it comes down to, how long has it been? Was this towards someone? Who was it towards? Are they willing to talk to you? There's so many different scenarios that question comes up with forgiveness, within, and forgiving ourselves for choices we've made and things we could have done better. But I think the first step is, do you want to forgive, right? Right now we're talking about ourselves, but do you want to forgive yourself for something that's occurred? Do you want to experience life again to the fullest? And do you want to see a version of yourself that ultimately has moved on from whatever you were struggling with? See if I can shoot this video, be loud enough to catch this helicopter taking off. But yeah, that's the first thing, right? Is, do you want to forgive yourself? Do you want to move forward in life knowing that you can do better? Do you want to set aside the fact that somebody out there may never approve of you again? And you set aside any kind of emotions that's leading you to maybe drink or use drugs or overindulge in things that don't matter, right? Because the first step is, can we forgive the things that we've done, And if we can, that's the very first step, is admitting, right? It's like they say with alcoholics, can you admit it first that you've done something and you're not where you should be, not where you want to be? And so ultimately, that's the first step, right? Is admitting that something could have and should have, maybe should have went better. I'm going to pause this, see if we can catch this chopper going off in a moment. Like to try to catch something if I can. It has nothing to do with the topic. So that's the first step. Then, if it's a person that we're struggling with, maybe it's time to reach out to that person and say, hey, I could have done better. I should have done better. And regardless of the outcome, right? If they want something to do with you or not, or whether you're forgiven or not, whether you get that job back or not, or whether you get that status or title or whatever you think you might need, whether you get that back, the one of the best things you can do, right, is to admit, and then ultimately, move on with your life, knowing that you reached out and did your part. And then it's time to move on with life, right? You've forgiven yourself, you've reached out and done the best you can, regardless of the outcome. Now it's time to say, how do I step forward? How do I move forward with life? All right, then the steps are, what do I need to do next? What can I do to make certain that this certain thing or this same situation doesn't occur again, right? So I don't have to go through the same heartache and the same pain and suffering, right? So then it's we put together a plan. What did I do in the first place that maybe led to a part of my life that wasn't the greatest? And then we execute that plan every single day. And I always revert back to having goals, right? Having your goals written down. Review those goals every day and make sense of gratitude. Evoke the emotion, right? What would it feel like? What would it feel like to see these things come to life? What would it feel like to see your dreams and your imagination become your reality? I mean, wouldn't that be exciting? I mean, are we supposed to just sit around and bathe in negativity and unforgiveness and live a life of pain and suffering because, we were younger adults or immature adults or people that could have done better? I don't think we're supposed to sit around and live that the rest of our life, right? So now we move on to what would it feel like to be that best version of me moving forward? What would it feel like to have a life that's better than I've ever imagined, right? Because we've forgiven ourselves at this point. If there's anyone that was affected, we've reached out and said, hey, I could have done better. But now the focus is these goals, these dreams, the things that we want to see pan out. That becomes our focus, right? It gives us something to be excited about. And once we wake up every day and we're excited about something, we have something in mind that we'd like to see become a reality. We're kind to people and we're grateful. We got gratitude we're showing every day. We're starting our morning slow. We're pumping out daily discipline and watching the results show up. All of a sudden you're not worried about every single day forgiving yourself for something that's over and done with, right? You've moved on with your life, right? Maybe someone's dead and you don't have the chance to go back and say, hey, I'm sorry. Well, guess what? If they were believers, right? If you're on the same page as me, if they were believers, they're in a better place. They're not in pain, they're not suffering, and they're surely not worried about maybe something you could have did better, right? So you got to forgive yourself now. Then you got to pray and release it, right? If that's what you believe. And so if someone's gone and there's something that you feel like I can't get right now because someone's gone, well, that's how you get right, okay? And so when you wake up every day and you have that excitement and you have those things in mind that you look forward to, all of a sudden, you're living life more to the fullest. And as this goes on, the days go on, the hours, the weeks, the months, the years, you become a better version. And even if someone pops up and tries to remind you of something you didn't do or did do or could have done better, if you're doing the right things every single day and you're becoming a better person, you're not really gonna care, right? You're gonna start saying, hey, yeah, you're right, it is what it is, I did that, could have done better, but this is where I'm at right now. This is who I am, and I'm taking these steps every single day, and whether someone believes you or not is not really your problem. But those daily steps every day are huge. They're gonna make a huge impact in your life. And ultimately, that's how you move past the whole concern of trying to fix everything that maybe wasn't perfect in the past, right? Back to the topic of how do we forgive ourselves? If you're building a life every single day that you're proud of, ultimately that becomes your focus, right? That becomes that ultimately becomes more of your identity, right? It becomes more of who you are. It becomes whether you call it an alter ego or your full-blown ego or the new version of you. Ultimately, this is what matters, right? And when you start to become more happy about that and more proud about that and more consistent with that version of yourself, then all of a sudden things just seem to click, right? I mean, there's always going to be people along the way, unfortunately, that may not agree with certain things or may not be in alignment with the seeds planted in your life. But that's not really your problem. Your problem is to keep pumping out and executing discipline every single day and allowing that to become your reality. Think of the people out there that give up on themselves, commit suicide or, murder, suicide, and all these things. Ultimately, these are people that were living with some sort of regret, right? Demons, parts of their life that they couldn't seem to get over and to get past. And they didn't have the discipline every day to implement new strategies, right? To develop that new mindset. Now, it gets a lot deeper. I don't want to get on that topic at this moment because everyone's going to have their own emotions evolved when it comes to topics like that. But ultimately, if you think about it, if somebody is struggling in life and they take the steps necessary to rebuild, then perhaps in life they will see things from a new perspective, and things will get better, and they'll be happier. And the struggle with not forgiving themselves, which might lead to things like suicide, that won't be often. That's not going to be the case if someone is implementing new steps every single day to have a better chance at doing things the right way moving forward. So anyways, that's the topic I want to touch on today. Forgive yourself. Put those steps in place every single day. Move forward with your life. If there's some people you need to get right with, throw it out there. Tell them you're sorry. Get right, because ultimately it's going to benefit you, right? Ultimately that's what you want, to have a better life, and that's ultimately how you're going to forgive yourself. And just stick with it every single day, and become the best version of yourself. So ultimately you don't have to worry about those steps that you might have done incorrectly in the past, and just allow yourself to have a better life. That's just the best advice I can offer on this sunny day in Florida.